$108 billion. That is the estimated cost U.S. automakers are absorbing in 2025 alone, not from recession, not from a global pandemic, but from a single policy decision. The average price of a new car in America is now flirting with $50,000, and according to Kelley Blue Book, tariffs alone are pushing that number up by as much as $6,000 on vehicles priced under 40000. And in October 2025, Canada, America's single largest trading partner, executed a financial strike that no one in Washington was fully prepared for, slashing General Motors' tariff-free import quota by 24.2% and Stellantis by a staggering 50%. These are not distant projections. These numbers are live. They are landing on balance sheets today. An industry that drives $1.2 trillion into the U.S. economy, nearly 4.8% of American GDP, and supports more than 10.1 million jobs, is now staring down a modern manufacturing crisis that nobody voted for, and very few people fully understand. By the end of this report, you will see why the very tariffs designed to bring manufacturing home are instead sending it somewhere else entirely, and the evidence is more dramatic than most realize. To understand how we arrived here, you need to understand what the North American auto industry actually was before this trade war began. For decades, the supply chain between the United States, Canada, and Mexico was one of the most seamlessly integrated industrial ecosystems in human history. A single Ford F-150 crosses the US-Canada border 6 or 7 times before it's fully assembled. Parts manufactured in Michigan travel to Ontario for processing, return to Ohio for assembly, and shipped to dealerships in Texas. This was not just trade. This was one giant borderless factory floor. Then came Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian automobiles, which took effect on April 3, 2025. Ottawa did not absorb the blow quietly. Canada's finance and industry ministers François-Philippe Champagne and Joly responded with surgical precision. In April, the Canadian government launched its auto remission program, a framework that would allow automakers to continue importing US-assembled vehicles into Canada tariff-free, on one explicit condition: that those same companies maintain their Canadian manufacturing commitments. Produce here, invest here, keep workers here. The message was direct. The old predictable world where trade flowed freely by default was over. The new volatile reality had a price tag. And then, in October 2025, both GM and Stellantis broke the deal. General Motors quietly confirmed the end of production of its BrightDrop electric delivery vans at the CAMI assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, eliminating over 1,000 jobs. Meanwhile, Stellantis announced it would move production of the iconic Jeep Compass from its Brampton, Ontario facility to a plant in Illinois, exporting those jobs south of the border. Canada's response was immediate and ruthless. The financial fallout is not theoretical. It is already reverberating through quarterly earnings reports. General Motors reported that its Q2 2025 operating profit fell by $1.1 billion due to tariff exposure, contributing to a 35% decline in net income in a single quarter. Stellantis, the maker of Jeep, Ram, Dodge, and Chrysler, posted a preliminary net loss of $2.68 billion in the first half of 2025, not a profit shortfall, a loss. And now, with Canada slashing GM's tariff-free quota by 24.2% and Stellantis by 50%, those losses are set to compound dramatically. Industry analysts warn the financial penalty on GM alone could run into hundreds of millions of additional dollars in new tariff exposure on US-made vehicles entering the Canadian market. But the deepest wound is to the supply chain itself. This is not just a pricing dispute between two governments. It is the systematic tearing apart of a manufacturing ecosystem built over 60 years. Consider the compounding effect. Trump's 25% auto tariff raises input costs. Automakers absorb billions in losses. They respond by cutting Canadian production. Canada retaliates by slashing tariff-free import quotas. American vehicles now face 25% counter tariffs entering Canada. That means fewer American-made cars sold in the Canadian market. That means less revenue, not more, flowing back to American workers and shareholders. The mechanism designed to protect U.S. manufacturing is, in fact, making American manufacturing less competitive, not more. A J.P. Morgan analysis estimated the combined tariff burden on vehicles and auto parts will reach $41 billion in the first year alone, rising to $45 billion in year two. These are not rounding errors. These are existential numbers. But there is a gravity to this crisis that the headlines are only beginning to capture. Beneath the quarterly losses and the political announcements lies a structural collapse that has been building for a decade, in which the current trade war is now accelerating at a terrifying pace. Canadian auto production has fallen from 2.3 million vehicles in 2016 to just 1.2 million vehicles in 2025. That is a nearly 50% collapse in output over 9 years. And in 2025 alone, production declined a further 7%. Canada's auto sector supports 500,000 workers and contributes over $16 billion annually to Canada's GDP. Those are not just Canadian numbers. They represent the workforce of an interconnected supply chain that feeds components into American factories every single day, and capital is already evaluating its exit. Stellantis, which received $105 million in Canadian federal funding for its Ontario plants before quietly announcing its U.S. expansion plans, is now committing $13 billion to U.S. operations, adding more than 5,000 jobs on American soil. That sounds like a win for America, but look closer. By 2030, if the integrated supply chain continues to fracture at this pace, the Canadian manufacturing corridor, which underpins the cost efficiency of American auto production, will be a shadow of itself, and rebuilding it will cost far more than the tariffs ever collected. The dark irony. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the quiet part out loud. At a Toronto Business Summit in October 2025, he told the audience that the Trump administration explicitly wants to drain vehicle assembly out of Canada. This is not a trade dispute. This is a declared industrial demolition campaign. And while Washington and Ottawa raid punishing blows, someone else is quietly pulling up a chair at the table. Mexico. The landscape could not be more different. While Canada's auto production collapses, while GM and Stellantis hemorrhage billions, while American consumers absorb price hikes of $4,000 to $6,000 per vehicle, Mexico has positioned itself as the safe harbor of the North American automotive corridor. Mexico's auto sector exports 92% of its vehicles to US, Canadian, and German markets. It has spent decades building CUSMA-compliant supply chain infrastructure that today remains largely insulated from the worst of this trade war. And as of August 2025, over 84% of Mexico-US trade remains tariff-free under CUSMA exemptions, a structural advantage that is becoming more valuable by the month. The numbers reveal a decisive divergence. In a remarkable reversal, Mexico has already displaced Canada as America's top export market for 4 of the past 5 months ending Canada's 34-year reign in that role. This is not just a trade statistic. It is a seismic shift in North American economic gravity. Mexico is not winning because it is smarter. It is not winning because it is building better cars. It is winning because it avoided the self-inflicted wounds of a tariff war it had no part in starting. The chilling reality is this: while the United States and Canada wound each other, Mexico simply kept its factories running and its trade deals intact. Capital flows towards certainty, and in 2025, Mexico is the only address in North America offering that certainty at scale. It is easy to speak of this crisis in billions and percentages. It is harder to speak of it in the language of human lives, but that is the more honest conversation. In the heartland of North American auto manufacturing, Windsor, Ontario, Ingersoll, Brampton, Detroit, the steel corridors of Michigan and Ohio, families are now calculating the human arithmetic of a trade war their elected officials promised would protect them. Canada lost 33,000 jobs in March 2025 alone, as the first wave of tariffs landed. By mid-year, 23,000 Canadian auto workers had permanently lost their jobs, with economists warning the toll will deepen. GM's cancellation of Bright Drop van production in Ingersoll eliminated over 1,000 jobs that existed precisely because of the integrated North American supply chain that is now being unwound bolt by bolt. On the American side of the border, the math is equally brutal. The average American household that buys a new car is now looking at a sticker price that may soon exceed $50,000 for the first time in history. For working families in the Rust Belt, families who build these vehicles, who depend on the profitability of the companies they work for, a $6,000 price hike is not an abstraction. It is the difference between affording the vehicle you manufacture and being priced out of it. Unifor President Lana Payne, whose union represents 320,000 workers across Canada's industrial sectors, delivered the most precise summary of this moment. We can't keep taking these hits without pushing back, and now Canada is pushing back. The perfect storm has arrived. A policy architected to protect American manufacturing is actively unraveling the very sectors it was designed to safeguard. The tariffs raised prices on American consumers. The retaliation raised costs on American automakers. The production pullbacks triggered Canadian quota cuts, and the quota cuts are now amplifying the losses that started the whole cycle. It feeds itself, and it grows. History will not be kind to this moment. What is unfolding before us is not a bold reshaping of the industrial order. It is a strategic miscalculation of historic proportions executed in public, in real time, with full visibility of the consequences. The logic of the tariff was seductive. Force automakers to move production to American soil, create jobs, revive the manufacturing heartland, an industrial renaissance they called it. And on the surface, a few headline moves validate the narrative. Stellantis is investing $13 billion in U.S. operations. Jobs are shifting from Brampton to Illinois. But the facts speak for themselves. The U.S. auto industry has absorbed $108 billion in estimated tariff costs in a single year. GM's profits have collapsed by 35%. Stellantis has posted a $2.68 billion loss. The integrated supply chain that made North American auto manufacturing cost competitive with the world has been fractured, perhaps irrevocably, within 18 months, and Canada, no longer willing to absorb economic punishment without consequence, has now made it 25% more expensive for GM and Stellantis to sell American-made vehicles in the Canadian market. The jobs that were supposed to flow home are instead flowing to Mexico. The consumers who were supposed to benefit are instead paying $6,000 more per vehicle, and the companies that were supposed to thrive under protection are posting historic losses. By 2030, if the integrated North American auto corridor continues to fracture at this pace, analysts project the sector could lose a significant portion of its cost competitiveness permanently. The manufacturing infrastructure, the supplier networks, the skilled labor pipelines, these take decades to build and only months to destroy. Prime Minister Mark Carney returned from the White House in October 2025 empty-handed, with Canada's projected deficit ballooning towards C62, $3 billion and no trade deal in sight. The CUSMA review that could reset the terms of this relationship is not scheduled to formally begin until July 2026. That is not a resolution, that is a countdown. And so the central question crystallizing over the American auto industry is no longer theoretical. It is urgent. It is existential. Will the United States pivot and save its most critical manufacturing ecosystem before the damage becomes permanent? Or will it continue down this path and cede North America's industrial future to Mexico forever? The answer to that question will be written not in press releases, but in the quarterly reports, the factory closures, and the empty parking lots of the towns that built the American automobile. Is Canada's quota cut a proportionate act of economic self-defense or an escalation that will cost both nations dearly? Is Washington's auto tariff a bold industrial strategy, or the most expensive miscalculation in modern trade history? The data is in front of you. The trajectory is clear. Subscribe for more fact-based, data-driven global analysis. We don't predict the future. We read the evidence that's already there. Thanks for watching.